So this is the process for a project that was called Unhinged in the Haunted Basement. So, and one of the other things, I showed this poster from the haunted basement, and I talked about the haunted basement being an 18-plus haunted basement in the soap factory. It's 18-plus because you run the risk of hurting yourself, not necessarily because it's pornographic. And I was looking through a bunch of projects last night, and I realized that this one was heavily indebted to art history. So I thought that might be a good place to start, since no one wants to take art history, including me. So I'm going to start with the initial presentations. This will also go into ideation as well. One thing that occurs to me, this one is different than the normal haunted basement thing. So normally what happens is you go down in a group of 4 people, and then you get terrorized for 45 minutes or whatever. In this one, they decided to switch it up, and instead you go down with like 100 people. So what happens is you go down with like 100 people, and you all have masks on, and you have the same masks on as the actors. So once you're down in there, you have no idea who's an actor, who is a ticket holder, whatever you'll call it, an attendee, and then you wander through this sort of horrible nightmare of events and actions and whatnot. So instead of being guided through it, you work your way through it. And so it's based on the novel Crime and Punishment. And so you actually go into this world that like is this surrealist nightmare of Crime and Punishment. If you haven't read Crime and Punishment, a poverty-stricken, know-it-all writer decides that the cure to all his problems is to kill an old woman who runs a pawn shop because she exploits the proletariat, basically. And then it turns out he's not really the kind of person that can kill people and walk away from it without being changed by it, and his life descends into total nightmare. To sum it up very briefly. So, when you go into the haunted basement this time, you're actually walking into this sort of surrealist fever dream nightmare. So give some context. So let's see. So to research this, I met with the program director and the kind of project manager, the people that are coming up with the ideas and that are going to run it. And then I started reading Crime and Punishment. But luckily, I also had their kind of Cliff's Notes of what was important to them and what parts they were stealing from. And I'm trying to remember the exact process, but I don't think I had much time to work on this. Maybe weeks to do the whole entire thing. So I had to come up with a way to work really, really fast. And I couldn't do, for example, my crazy grid of idea interlocking stuff because I didn't really have that amount of time to work. So I was just jotting down notes looking for ideas that seemed visual. So one of the things that they were really grabbing onto was that he kills this woman with an axe. I feel like, does he kill her roommate too or her daughter? Has anyone read it? Daughter. Okay, yeah, he kills her daughter with an axe as well because it's like she's in the apartment when he goes to murder her, and he doesn't even realize he's leaving the apartment like covered in blood because killing people with an axe will do that to you. So this idea of like blood in your eyes was kind of an interesting, just visual, and then fever dreams and sort of clouded vision, sort of walking through a nightmare after that. And the other thing is like he's already starved before this, like he's living off like bread and alcohol basically. And he's super bitter and delusional. So he's already in this kind of deluded dream state. And then once he carries out the murders, it just all gets so much worse. So I started thinking about the idea of like blood in the eyes, fever dreams, clouded vision, and started looking for illustrations that sort of got that point across. So probably what I was doing was starting with some source material where I knew what to look for. So, like, I might have started with these pieces of art by Jacob Bannon, like they're probably sleeves for Converge records, and then starting from there, like, can use sort of Pinterest to like find similar images to have this like big range of like, oh, that's kind of an interesting like illustration style. So like whether it looks like actually clouded or whether it's drawings that melt into nothing, distorted type that's got like kind of cloudy crap on top of it, or even just like the idea of these simple geometric raining studies of stuff. Just trying to pull a bunch of different ideas. My plan was to go to them and say, here's the thing I'm thinking about, here's the ideas behind it. I don't know what it will look like, but this is the sort of stuff I'm looking at. So like, as you can see, there's not really a unified aesthetic in here. And I think like in this one, it really did start with probably Jacob Bannon stuff, some type things like non-format, I knew what to expect there. And maybe I was even looking through my own Pinterest and I saw these old 1960s Armin Hoffman things and I thought of them as kind of interesting filters. But when it comes down to it, I wasn't planning to make any of these things, right? Like making a Jacob Bannon piece would be annoying and stupid. The second one was called Novel, and it was to allude to the origins of Unhinged being a crime and punishment adaptation. And thinking about basically 1960s sci-fi paperbacks was the big sort of motivation and kind of op art. So these are covers of these Penguin poetry series designed by the Italian designer Franco Grignani. Here's another one. He would do a lot of stuff with just interesting photo manipulation. So he'd start with, say, like a city, and then just process and distort and destroy that thing until he got somewhere. This was an example of where type could go. Kind of surrealist Czech book covers, more crazy op art distortions. And then this stuff is actually recent. It's by a designer called Julian House out of the UK, who sort of took influence from some of the same ideas, old novels, 1960s sort of type, and then crazy kind of psychedelic layering. And there's no point at which they tell you it's about crime and punishment, because no one would go to that. Because they'd be like, it's based on a 19th century Russian novel. Yeah, that does not sound like a haunted basement. But I like the idea of kind of embedding a layer into it that if you were talking about it with someone, they'd be like, oh, it's crime and punishment. Or like, oh, yeah, we designed it based on this. I kind of like the idea of having things that are interesting visuals that have the meaning is only apparent to the people who have made it. And that if other people find out, cool. But otherwise, all that matters is it interesting and attention-getting. And then this one was called Decollage, and it was about being surrounded by commerce and exploitation, invasion of public space, and rotting institutions. So when I was reading Crime and Punishment, in my mind, I just imagined this world covered with posters. It's like the advent of the printing press and basically public advertising. And it's, he's railing against capitalism, and he feels like engulfed by it. So I thought it'd be interesting, like in my head, this is what capitalism in 19th century Russia looked like. And I started with a few things that I had been like looking at already. So I think this is maybe, I believe these are both Mimo Rotella pieces, who is this one is too, a 1960s Italian artist who coined the term, or was he French? I can't remember, who coined the term décollage, which basically he'd make these collages by tearing everything off the walls. And he'd sort of remake the layers of crap that lived around. At the same time, I had some old classmates who had an art collective called Fail, and they kind of used that same aesthetic. So that was helpful for seeing a sort of like more content-driven form of that. And then I was just also searching for textures in that same realm. This thing was interesting, so I was like, okay, maybe there's a type solution inside of this. But the Mimo Rotella thing was really interesting because I don't remember how I discovered his work. It may have been an art history class. It was more likely just a book, like an art history book that I was flipping through and was like, oh, that's awesome. One of the things about why I think that art history and spending a lot of time in the library and all of that is really interesting is that if you have to work really fast, and as a graphic designer, it's really different, but I think that if I did something more narrative, I would probably have a lot of the same methodologies. I feel like I'd be quoting and referencing other images, other movies, other comics kind of all the time. Because I know that in my brain, I like to reference things and throw them in there, even if no one gets the reference. It's like a little way of kind of owning the work and embedding myself in it, especially in something where I'm the middleman, like client, audience. My job is just to make something for the client that connects with the audience. Yes. Being able to call on something really quickly is really helpful as a designer to go, okay, I've got to come up with this idea. I kind of see this thing. Mimo Rotello paintings kind of look like that. Fail kind of looks like that. This other person kind of looks like that. And to be able to find some stuff quickly to help communicate an idea. Because one of the things I don't want to do is just have this idea, design it, spend all this time on it, throw it in front of the client, and then have them go, yeah, we're not really feeling that, or we don't like that idea, or whatever. So I need to try to get something in front of them very quickly where they can go, oh, that's a cool idea. And again, I have to sort of promise, listen, it's not going to look like this, it's just going to be in the neighborhood of this, because I have no idea what it's going to look like until I actually make it. So, design process. More slides from the presentation? That's a bad note. Okay, so they approved the decollage idea. So I'm trying to quickly figure out how it's going to work and what I'm going to make. So I just grab a bunch of random stuff in my basement and start scanning it. And then at the same time, I have to figure out what the type is going to look like. So I started looking through just street photography that I had already and textures. So I guess that's what the sync is about. A lot of like stencil type, big kind of crappy sans serif, stuff like that. Just looking for like textures that I'm going to place into these forms, these ripped paper forms. As soon as I started comping something together, I was like, oh man, I've made a mistake. This sucks and it's going to suck. Because this probably took like an hour and I was just like, oh, I'm doomed. I've screwed up so badly by proposing this thing without testing it first. So it was terrible. I do like this one little piece though. Then I remembered, why don't you try the live trace function in Illustrator? And as soon as I did that, so I just took one of the, like some of those pieces, quickly live traced them, which basically just makes a drawing around it. And then I was like, oh man, this is awesome. This is totally going to work. And then I started playing with, I think these are fairly in order. This is probably one of the earliest ones. And I started figuring out like, okay, how is type going to still be readable in here? So I started pulling in these other pieces, checking out like, should they be flatter or should they be kind of black and white? And then looking at lots of different color options. And then it turned out that some of the stuff I had scanned in the beginning that I wasn't planning on using that imagery, I just wanted those shapes, was going to work. Like all of a sudden, this ridiculous when I feel the weight of the world on my shoulders from this dude was awesome. You know, just add or whatever. Like all of a sudden it seemed like actually like it enhanced the emotional quality of it. And I just tried a couple different things. Sort of, I don't remember what this color palette was about, but I just kind of dug it. And then a black and white one in case that was the better idea. So I just sent them these basically square things that in my mind were like, here's an Instagram graphic. If this works, we're going to do more of it. So yeah, we just sent two options over. This one and then that one. It's like, I forgot how good the black and white one is. And the type, again, is also like indebted to my understanding of design history. So it references Victorian wood type advertising and posters through the types of typefaces and the arrangements and how they live together. The constant changing of fonts, all of that stuff comes from this other source. And then the other thing I liked was this stuff that was left over from the scans, like workout programs. Like if there's anything that seems spammy and overly invasive of your space, it's anything trying to sell you like a workout program or a diet or something. I thought that was kind of cool. Design expansion. So then we have to just expand this thing. So I wanted to bring in photography that now had some meaning that I didn't have to pay for. So I went to the Library of Congress. One thing that really struck with me was that I knew there was going to be this scene in the haunted basement where there's like a dead horse, kind of rotting dead horse. So I found this photo of a bunch of dead horses after a Civil War battle. I was like, whoa, that is interesting. And then this photo, so the other thing is you go in there and there's all these cops everywhere. So they, like, it ups the paranoia of, what's the dude's name in Crime and Punishment? Do you remember? Escapes me. Anyway, he's super paranoid about the cops all the time because he's killing people. So there's this great photo of this, like, this early 20th century cop, like, looking right at you. The best part is the whole photo, everyone is looking in the right direction. He's the only person looking directly at the camera, which I just thought like it was very kind of icky and fantastic. We had to figure out how to work the soap factory logo in and look at a couple different ways of doing it and a couple different ways of bringing photography in. Like, do we use just one photo or lots of them or whatever? And then this is what we ended up producing. So they have these windows on the side of the building here that never get used, and they have no budget whatsoever, like no money. So we bought blinds, not blinds, we bought like retractable curtains for these windows and printed gigantic stickers in the Service Bureau and stuck them to all the blinds, which like each one took an hour and a half to do. And I highly regretted it. And then at that point, we also had real photography from this, the haunted basement. So there's all these people in here with the masks in the woman's apartment. We've got, I wish I could remember his name, stalking the halls with an axe. Can't tell what's going on up there. More freaky stuff. So these were these big windows we made. And then we produced more social media graphics. There's a woman about to get killed with an axe. And then we produced bus ads. For some reason, I didn't really get paid, but there was money to buy advertising. I don't know how that works. This had way too much copy. This is what all nonprofits do, is they put way too much copy on everything. I tried to convince them to have less copy to get these things. And we had to figure out, like, how do you organize this much type? Still way too much copy is a nightmare. I really like this one, though, especially like the cops staring at you on the streets. Oh, and then we had to put 40 million logos in it, too. Craziness. My request to kill the logos hadn't been approved, so I tried to make the design work in spite of them. Though I guess they trusted me to get rid of some information. So it was like a little bit more graphic, very kind of simple, and I spent a lot of time pushing these little specks of white around. Oh, this must be the last one. They must have let me get rid of the logos. Yay. Victories for me. So mostly I just spent days pushing all these blocks around, recoloring them, trying to find like how to heighten it. And that's like the final billboard. Of course, I don't have photography of anything. I don't know how that works out. And then some bus station ads, which are very grim and beautiful, if I do say so myself. Okay. Having a really keen interest in art history, design history, and a lot of source material makes it a lot easier for me to come up with ideas on the fly, because if I had to go into it and not have a lot of time, but then try to come up with 3 ideas, and I have to do all this reading, I have to actually go out and look for a bunch of stuff, but because my basement at any given time is just filled with books, because I am the kind of person that goes to the library and just looks at the spines of books and goes, that looks interesting. And then I like pull that out, and all of a sudden, like, that's how I discovered Robert Rauschenberg work, or that's how I would discover some German artist I'd never heard of. It's just like wandering, neat, pull that out, check it out. So even though art history classes themselves can be boring and painful as you're sitting in the dark looking at one slide for way too long, the value of having this massive amount of inputs is really, really helpful. As long as you don't use that as a distraction for not making stuff, right? Like, you don't want to get into the thing where you need to do 1 million hours of research all the time, or that you put off doing actual work because you're like, I don't know enough about art history. But that if you're just constantly feeding yourself, there's going to be all these new sources to pull from, and it kind of goes across the board. And there's sources that are helpful. So we can make the argument like, oh, I listen to music for inspiration. But like, I can't turn music into visual ideas. Like, I have to find, I can interpret them as a fun thing, but if I need to come up with a visual idea, no amount of listening to whatever Public Enemy is going to give me a visual idea. It might give me an idea for a visual that then I still need to go out and find something in the world that helps me imagine it. The other reason that having all this stuff is helpful is I can't just imagine amazing things. I can't just sit down and go like, of course now I could totally do it, but it would be stupid and not make sense. But I can't just like conjure up images. I have to see other things and then go, oh, if I could pull this from over here and this from over here and jam those together, that could be a thing. Some people, I imagine, can just think of amazing things. And if you can do that, awesome for you. I am envious of that ability. I need to see other things to understand what's possible. And so to expand the realm of possibilities, I have to look at lots and lots of stuff. So even if you hate art history, at the very least, be constantly looking through art history books just for like, oh, what's that? Like look for all the stuff they skip over, like your Mimo Rotellas or whatever.